Whether you are working on a project in college, want to contribute to open source, or you want to pursue a career in software development, the understanding of Git and GitHub is a must-have. But those who start to code are mostly terrified even by the name of it. I believe that by the end of this video, you will have a good understanding of the basics of Git and GitHub. And once you are good with the basics, the rest you will be able to grasp very easily. So before diving into the commands and practical examples, let's first understand what Git is all about. So Git, in most simple words, is the version control system. What do I mean by that? So version control system means it helps you track and keep a record of the changes that you are making to your code over time. But you might be wondering, why would you even require Git in your projects? So imagine a very normal scenario. You are working on a project and you accidentally delete an important file, or you made a change which breaks everything. Now with Git, it's possible that you revert to a previous working version and save yourself. Not just this, Git helps in solving many other problems as well. One of the questions that I had in mind when I was learning Git was, is there really a difference between Git and GitHub? Yes, there is a difference between Git and GitHub. So Git basically helps us manage our code locally on your computer. However, GitHub is an online platform where we host our Git repositories. So by repository, I simply mean a project folder here. So when multiple people are working on the same project, maybe building different features, they require a platform wherein they can collaborate, save the changes that other person is making to the code, deploy their own piece of code, and also helps resolve conflicts when merging updates from other developers working on the same project. So GitHub basically provides a very simple way to share, save, and collaborate on Git projects with others. If you don't have Git installed on your local machine, the first thing that you need to do is to install Git. So you can simply go to this website and download Git as per your operating system. Then we can also check if Git is installed properly or not. So I'll be using terminal here and I will write the command git ---- version. So if it gives you the version, that means Git is installed properly. The next step that we are going to do is we are going to configure our Git environment variables like email and username, so that the next time we are using Git in our next project, we don't have to give this information again and again to Git. So for that, we simply need to write the command git config, since we want to configure these variables globally, and we will give the username. You can give your name here, hit enter, and the next thing that we are going to configure here is the email. We can also check if these configuration details are saved properly. For that, I will write the command git config list. And here you are able to see that user.name is Itisha Garg and user.email is gargitisha@gmail.com. For learning Git, we will be using terminal. You can use other softwares as well like Bitbucket, GitHub Desktop, SourceTree, etc. But I would highly recommend that once you are acquainted with using Git on terminal, the other softwares will be piece of cake for you. Now let's head on to our tutorial. So for this tutorial, we'll create a project folder first. I will call it, say, Itisha Portfolio. So I want to create this in my downloads folder within code folder. Here I will create a new directory. I will name it Itisha Portfolio. So if we do an ls here, we can see that within our code folder, there is JavaScript projects and now another folder called as Itisha Portfolio. And I will now go inside this project folder. Right now, this is just a normal project folder. But I want to start controlling this project folder with Git, because up to this point, this is not under version control. For that, I will be using just a simple command, that is git init. So what this git init is doing, it is basically initializing a Git repository, converting my existing project into a Git repository, which will be then tracked and managed by Git. You can see that it's showing that it has initialized an empty Git repository in this folder. And you can see that there is one folder that is created, which is .git folder. But if I do an ls here, you can see that there are no files and folders inside it. Even if I go to my project folder and see within Itisha Portfolio, there are no folder that is created. So where has this .git folder gone? It's basically a hidden folder which is not visible. So for seeing this, we can do an lsa, and now you can see that there is a .git folder here created. So if I go inside this and see what all files and folders are here. So you can see there are multiple folders like the config file, which we have just talked about, and other folders as well. You need not worry about these folders at this point in time. Now we will create one file inside this project. So I'll go back to my folder. So let us create one new file and call it index.html. Okay, now again, if we do an ls, you can see that index.html is created. What do you think? This index.html file is tracked by Git or not? The answer to that is no, not yet. We need to run some command so that Git is able to recognize that there is a file called index.html that it has to track. There is a command that we can use called as git status to check if what I'm saying is true or not. So you can see that we are on branch main, there are no commits, and there is an untracked file. So before going into depth of this, let's first understand about the Git Workflow Lifecycle. So basically there are 4 stages in the Git Workflow Lifecycle. The first is the working directory. The second is the staging area, third is the local repository, and the fourth is the remote repository. So working directory is basically the playing area or the project folder in which you make modifications to. So the project folder that we have built in which we created a new file, that is the working directory. So in working directory, the files are categorized into 2 types. One is tracked and the other is untracked. So tracked files are the files which Git knows about, and the untracked files are the ones which Git have no clue about. So when we did a git status, you would have seen that index.html file was called untracked because Git still does not know anything about it. From the working directory, we send the files to the staging area. So think of it in this way. Imagine you are packing your bag for a trip, and you collect all the items you are thinking you will keep in your bag at a place. So that place where you gather all the items is called the staging area, from where you will cherry pick which items you actually want to keep in your bag. Similarly, though, like the files from the staging area are cherry picked, and we decide which one we want to send to the local repository and which we don't want to send to the local repository. Next is the local repository. So local repository is the bag where we keep all the clothes that we actually want to take for the trip. So this repository keeps a track of the entire project history and also contains all the commits or all the changes that we have made to our code. It basically keeps a snapshot of the project state at a specific point in time. Last is the remote repository. So when we are ready to show our code to others, or we want to collaborate with others on a project that we have created locally, we push the code from the local repository to the remote repository on a platform like GitHub. It's the version of the code that is now hosted on the internet. I hope by now you would have a clear understanding of the Git workflow lifecycle and how a file first gets into the working directory, then moves to the staging area, then to the local repository, and finally the remote repository. Let's see a working example for that. So as of now, this index.html file we saw previously was untracked. That means Git does not have a clear idea that it needs to track this file. Now let's start tracking this file. So for doing that, we have to use this command git add. So with git add, send this change that you have made to your project folder to the staging area. So we can use git add dot, or we can also use git adds a, and it is going to send all the changes that we have made so far in our project folder to the staging area. If you want to send a specific file, you can also specify that file like this, but since I have just one change, I will do a git add dot. Now again, we are going to use the command and see what is the status. Status meaning in which state our file is right now. So if we do a git status, you can see that we are on branch main. No need to worry about the branches, we'll talk about that later. There are no commits, and there is a new file called index.html which is now sent to the staging area. So the next step that we need to do is, in order to send the file from the staging area to the local repository, once I'm so sure that I want Git to take a snapshot of this change and keep a permanent record of it in the Git's history, so that whenever I want, I can see that I have made the change to this file called index.html. To do that, I will just simply write the command git commit -m, and I will write the message. So with every commit, you should specify what change you have done, so that when you are reviewing this in future, you would be able to remember that this change was made due to this reason. So I will just write the commit message as created a new file index.html. So you can see that there is a new file, one file has changed, there are no insertion, no deletion. Okay, that's good. We have committed the file. So we have finally sent our change, that is a new file that we created, index.html, to the local repository. Remember one thing, if a file is not yet sent to the staging area, it will not get committed. You first need to send it to the staging area. There is also a way via which you can directly send the change that you have made to the local repository, skipping the staging area. For that, you simply need to write the command git commit -a-m, and then you need to write the commit message, whatever you want to write. So that's another way. Now let's see what's the git status. So you can see that on branch main there is nothing to commit and you are working on tree clean. As I told you that Git would have taken a snapshot of it. Let's see if we are able to see the history of the changes that we have made to this project so far. So for that, I will write the command git log. So you can see that by the author Itisha Garg with this email ID on Sunday, May 28 at this time, she created a new file called index.html, and this is the hash that is given to this change that I have made. So whenever I want, I can simply see the history that I created this file. As I have explained previously as well, Git only allows us to manage our code locally on our computer. But what about the case when I want to share this project with others, or I want others to also collaborate on the project? In that particular case, we need a platform wherein we can host this Git repository. So there are multiple options that we have, like GitLab, like GitHub, but for this tutorial we'll be using GitHub, which is the commonly used online platform for hosting the Git repositories. So for that, first thing that we need to do is to create an account on GitHub. So I have already created an account, you can create yours as well, and then we are going to create a new repository here. So you just have to click on new, then give the repository name. Usually we give the same name as we have given to our project. So I will call it Itisha Portfolio, and we will keep it public. I will not initialize this repository with anything because I want to keep my code that I have written as is here. So I'm not adding anything here, and I'm going to create this repository. Okay, our repository is now created. The main motive that we have is we need to send the changes that is saved in our Git repository, in our local repository, to our remote repository, right? But before that, we need to make a connection between those two repositories. So for doing that, you can see that on GitHub all the steps are mentioned. We first need to do a git remote add origin, and this is the link of this repository that is created. So I'm going to copy this, going back to my terminal, and I will write this. So you must be thinking that what is this origin here? So basically, we'll talk about branches later. I've said this earlier as well, but you can assume that there is a branch called as main on GitHub as well as on a local machine. But the main branch that is there on a remote repository, that is called origin, as a default naming convention on our local machine. So I'm going to add this origin branch of my remote repository, which have this URL, to my local machine. Let's see if that connection is made or not. So for that, I'll write the command git remote -v. Okay, so that connection is made. Now, the last thing that we need to do is we need to push the history or the changes that we have made or we have saved on our local repository to our remote repository. So for that, we will use this command git push origin main. So what you are doing here is you are moving the changes, or you are basically sending the changes that you have made to the main branch of your local repository to the main branch of your report repository that is called origin on our local machine. Now it is asking for my username, so I will give my username, and then it is also asking for password. How to set up this password, that I will give the link of it in the description box. You can check from there. There is a PAT token that you have to generate, which you have to use as a password. Okay, you can see that our code has been pushed to GitHub. Let's move on to GitHub and see. Let's reload this page. Now you can see that index.html has been put here. So now you can also share this project with others. So now, as and when you will make changes to your code, you can then once you have finalized, okay, I want to show this code to others, you can push this code to your remote repository. Before moving further, let's understand what is branching in Git. So similar to how tree have multiple branches, a Git repository can also have multiple branches in it. So the original trunk of the tree from where the branches originate, in Git's case, it is called the main branch. The purpose of this Git branching is when multiple people work on a single project, they, instead of working on the main branch, which contains the production ready version of the project, they instead create their own branch and work on it. And once they are sure about the code they have written, they send it for review, and so that it can be later merged to the main branch. In case of a company, generally the manager who is handling the project reviews the code and then merge that code with the main branch. Otherwise, it's the owner of the repository that does it. This ensures that if there is a bug in someone's code, that shouldn't affect other team members' code or the production ready code that is kept on the main branch. Also, it helps in ensuring that all the features in a project are individually tracked. So in future, if someone wants to only make a change in a particular feature, they can simply go to that branch, make the changes, and then push that code to be merged to the main branch. Let's try to create a branch for the project that we were building. Say I want to keep styling separate from the rest of the project. Which I was building. So I'm going to create a new branch. So for creating the branch, you just need to write git branch and the branch name. So I will say call it style. Okay. New branch is created, and then I will go inside this branch, git checkout the branch name, that is style. Okay. Now I'm switched to the style branch. Say I make some changes to my index.css file. I save it. Okay. So and now I'll go back to my terminal. If I do a git status, I'll be shown that there is an untracked file. Okay, so I'm going to do git add, then I'm going to do git commit. Okay, so this commit that I have done will be now committed to my new branch that I've created, that is the style branch. So if I again do a git status, so you can see on branch style, nothing to commit, and the working tree is clean. Now I want to push this change to my remote repository. So I will write git push origin, and now not from the main branch, I want to push the code from the style branch. So I will write git push origin style. Pushed to that, let's go to our repository and see if a new branch is created. So you can see that style has recent pushes less than a minute ago. You can see there are two branches now, one is main and one is style. We also have an option here which is compare and pull request. So now since the new code is pushed to my remote repository, it's asking whether I'm sure I want to merge both of the codes that are there. So I can click on compare and pull request. Pull request basically is a merge request wherein I want to merge the changes that I've made to the style branch with the main branch. So I can see, okay, these are the things that have been done. Then I click on creating a pull request, that is creating a merge request. Okay, require approval. This branch has no conflicts with the base branch, that is the main branch. So I'll click on merge pull. Confirm the merge. Now we will see that all of these changes will be now reflected to my main branch. So what we have done so far is we created a project, we then initialized Git in it, we committed the code to our local repository, and then we finally pushed that code to a remote repository that is stored on GitHub, right? Now say there is a project on your own GitHub account that you want to get on your local machine. So in order to do that, you have to clone the project. But if you want to say use or make changes to a project that is stored on someone else's GitHub account, you have to fork that project instead of cloning. That's the terminology that we use. So for example, if you want to make an open source contribution, you can fork that project, make changes to it, create a pull request, and if the owner of that project feels that the contribution that you have made is useful and it should be included in the main branch, they will accept the pull request or the merge request and merge your code to the main branch. That is what we call it as in open source contribution. We will definitely make a separate video on that. But for now, let's understand one last thing, that is how to use the git clone command. So say there is a project called React Restaurant website. I created this project in my last video and I want to get this on my local machine. I just have to copy this link of this remote repository, go back to my terminal. I simply have to write git clone and paste the link of the remote repository. So you can see that now my repository is cloned, and if I do ls here, you can see that there is a React restaurant website folder that is created. In case you want to fork a project, you will have to write this command, git remote add upstream and the link of the project. Okay, rest of the commands will remain the same. One last thing, if you want to sync your local branch with the remote repository, you can use the git pull command. It's also a commonly used git command. It's just a basic introduction that I've given in this video. There are so many other things to it as well, but if you have seen this complete video, you are ahead of 95% of the people in the software industry. You now have a basic understanding of how Git works, but rest you can easily learn on the fly. And if you want to learn more about the other commands that are there, the best resource out there is the Git documentation. And if you want me to make a part 2 of the video wherein we'll actually fork a project from GitHub and make an open source contribution, do let me know in the comment section down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more such videos in future.